Hi guys, welcome back aboard good old Athena. We're still here in the blistering heat in Trinidad. In this week's video we're going to do a bunch of oh glorious varnishing, but before we get to that there's a little task Ava's been talking about for about a year and a half. That is this task right here called freezer lid hinge. It should be fairly quick. After that, we are going to go off board, so to say. It's a task we don't yet have on the board. It is this one called varnish-palooza. I am no newcomer to varnishing, and I have nailed down my favorite process and products. But I couldn't get those products here in Trinidad, so in this week's video we're going to try some new products. I have tried GoldSpar before, but I've never tried the Interprime wood sealer. I have tried the product I hope this can kind of substitute for, but we'll see how that goes. And then also this stuff, Cetal here, I don't think this has been big in Europe, at least not in Denmark, so I have never tried Cetal before either.
My name is Mess, this is my wife Ava. I've spent the last 5 years on a somewhat extensive refit of our 1987 Warrior 38 named Athena. That was a DIY fun-packed adventure complete with a very extensive osmosis treatment, building a new rudder using vacuum infusion, rebuilding the entire deck, gutting and subsequently rebuilding most of the interior, painting the top sides, and a ton of other projects. The summer of 2021 we started cruising full time. Now we're finally ready to begin our adventure.
Welcome to the forward cabin. It is a little bit dark and rather messy in here. As you can see, Ava's side of the bed has been occupied by dive compressor filters, a giant box of cereal, a tin of Quality Street, and a ginormous bag of pasta. This is what happens when I'm left to fend for myself. But the reason for our excursion into the forward cabin is right here. Our freezer. For the last 2.5 years we've been sailing around with these two loose pieces of countertop and a bit of tape here to be able to remove them to get into our freezer. This was a temporary fix I came up with before leaving Denmark because we were running out of time. Ava's let it be known that she would be much pleased if I could come up with a better fix for the freezer lid situation, and she has been talking about this for about a year and a half, so I better do something. A few days ago, while browsing the local boat parts pusher store, I saw that they had a rather affordable piano hinge, or continuous hinge as they're also called. Ava's chief complaint with the current setup is not so much the decorative piece of tape, but the fact that to get into the freezer she needs to remove this piece of countertop and put it somewhere else to then lift the lid on the freezer. I think a really good and simple solution here is to put a piece of continuous hinge in between the two pieces. That way when we lift the big piece to get access to the freezer, the small piece will keep everything in place. To get rid of the tape I found this pull ring that should look a lot nicer, and before anybody freaks out that it's saying $135 down here, that is TT dollars, or Trinidad dollars. 100 Trinidad dollars is worth just shy of 15 US dollars, so 135 Trinidad dollars for that pull ring is not as obscene as it might seem at first, but yeah, it's still a little bit pricey. I grabbed a quick measurement of the width and cut a suitable piece off of the continuous hinge. The hinge had some kind of what I'm assuming is a protective coating on there of sticky, almost gummy feeling oil, but it was easy to remove. I'll be securing the hinge with screws. By pre-drilling, not only will the wood not splinter, but the holding force of the screws will also be higher. The hinge adds about 5 mm to the overall length. I have a somewhat limited tool selection aboard the boat, with a jigsaw being my only saw, which is not really known for precision cuts. But I also have a trim router with a flush trimming bit that can make a much straighter cut. The only downside to this approach is that it takes a bit of time and it generates a lot of dust. Fortunately, Ava will never find out because she is not here. Remember guys, snitches get stitches. After having lined up the hinge on the second part, I secured it with a couple of screws and did a successful test fit. There's no need to add all the screws until I know for sure that everything still fits. The pull ring requires a bit of material to be removed. Unfortunately, I don't have a suitable bit for my router, but I do have a Forstner bit and a bit of patience. Everything still seems to fit, so I moved on to the last step of adhering the countertop to the lids. I used a relatively weak double-sided tape, but as you can see, it seems to work perfectly fine. I could have gone with a much stronger adhesive or a much stronger double-sided tape, like for instance 3M's VHB tape, but there is a small chance that in 6 months when we replace the countertop in the galley, we're also going to want to replace all the stuff in here. So I like the idea of being able to take everything apart again. As much as it pains any husband to admit when his wife was right, I do think Ava might have been onto something with the countertop fridge opening here. It is really nice to be able to just open it in one go instead of having to move the loose bits of countertop around. But of course, we can never tell her that, so remember with the snitches and the stitches. And on that ominous note, we can go ahead and close the freezer lid hinge task. But I am gonna need a few minutes to set up for the varnish-palooza task. I've removed all of the loose bits of trim I'm gonna be varnishing. And I guess if you want to be super pedantic, you could argue that technically what I'm doing here it wouldn't be considered varnishing because of the products I'm using. But if you look up how the dictionary defines varnishing, then yeah, this is the definition. So I don't think it's too far of a stretch for me to say that I'll be varnishing. For some of the stuff I'm going to be varnishing, like the door frame here, the trim into the shower, and also the trim around the companionway, I can't really remove that, so I'll have to do that in situ. But certainly for any little pieces I can remove, that is going to make my life easier. My favorite approach to getting spiffy looking wood revolves around a product from Interlux or International called Clear Wood Sealer Fast Dry. It's a 2-part product and it is nothing short of amazing. You can get 3 coats on in a day, even at normal temperatures, and that means it is super fast to build up enough film thickness to get a super smooth surface without any kind of wood texture, and also get a nice deep rich color. And yeah, then you just finish off with a couple of coats of regular varnish. A good example of spiffy looking wood would be something like this knee trim here in the galley. As you can see, it's a super smooth surface. There's no wood grain or texture. And the only way to achieve that is to build up enough film thickness. Getting to that film thickness is super easy with a product like the Clear Wood Sealer Fast Dry that I like so much. But unfortunately, I couldn't find that here in Trinidad. I found another product from International called Interprime Wood Sealer. I am not expecting this to be as awesome as its 2-part cousin, but hopefully it'll help me build up that film thickness faster and hide the grain of the wood faster than just using straight varnish. Looking at the TDS or technical data sheet for the wood sealer, they recommend 2 coats with a minimum overcoating interval of 12 hours. I am not expecting this 1-part product to be as awesome as the 2-part product, but yeah, hopefully it'll help a little bit. On top of the wood sealer, I'm going to be using a couple of coats of this stuff, the GoldSpar Satin. I've used this stuff before and I really like it as a top coat. But again, once you've experienced the sweet, sweet luxury of building up film thickness with something like the Clear Wood Sealer Fast Dry, then doing that with a product like this is just mind-boggling slow. Our companionway, as is the case aboard most boats, gets a lot of traffic. It's basically the only way in and out of the boat. And because of that, I would like to see if I can find a product that's a little bit more durable than just regular old varnish. Enter stage left. Ceatol. If you go back and read older forum posts on the internet, then Ceatol has a little bit of a mixed reputation. I think a lot of people agree that it's longer lasting than regular varnish, but then Ceatol used to apparently have a lot more pigment in their products that would color whatever wood you were treating with kind of a weird color that a lot of people didn't like so much. But that color apparently no longer is an issue. There are a few different products in Ceatol's marine lineup. They have a couple of satin finishes and a couple of glossy finishes. Personally, I really like the satin finishes, but I couldn't find those here in Trinidad. So I've gone with the Marine Light, which is one of the glossy finishes. We'll see how it looks once it's on the wood. For now, I'd just like to get it on there so that the companionway trim is protected. And then if I don't like the look of it, we can always switch over to one of the satin options once we're somewhere where that is available. But I still have a bit of prep work to take care of, so let's get started. Mainly, said prep work revolved around getting everything sanded with 120 grit and removing anything that could get in the way while varnishing. Again, here I caused a giant mess that I will definitely need to clean up before the return of the wife unit. After having wiped down everything and taped off where I needed to, it was on to the first coat of wood sealer. This stuff feels like applying that first coat of heavily thinned varnish. It goes on super easy, but I couldn't help but wonder if this will actually help me build up film thickness. With such a low viscosity, the percentage of solids in the product must be very low. I am truly excited to see how this little experiment is going to turn out. I held off until evening time to apply the first coat of Cetal to not be applying it in direct sunlight. To be honest, seeing the color of the first coat very much made me question the choice in product, but I've already paid for it, so let's give it a go. It is now 2 days later and I've got 2 coats of the wood sealer on all of the interior trim. The TDS specifies 1 to 2 coats or until gloss is achieved, and I would say I have achieved gloss. As soon as I saw that first coat of wood sealer and the low viscosity, I knew it wasn't really going to help me build up a lot of film thickness. And if you look at the wood here, I don't know if it's going to show up on camera, but you can still very much see the texture of the wood. But maybe hiding that texture is not the point of the wood sealer, because I was reading the TDS and it says that it will keep subsequent coats of paint or varnish from being absorbed from the wood. So maybe that's the point of the wood sealer, that the coats you apply after the wood sealer won't get absorbed, meaning they will build up thickness a little bit faster. But then that begs the question, how does this leave me in a better position than just applying a couple of coats of varnish? Of course, the answer to that question is I have absolutely no idea, but I'm very excited to see what the first few coats of varnish are going to behave like going on top of the wood sealer. I also have 2 coats of Cetal on the trim here in the companionway, and as I mentioned, after having applied that first coat, I got a little bit scared because Cetal does have a kind of strong color to it, almost a brownish with a slight hint of orange maybe, and the first coat looked kind of weird, but this is 2 coats, and if we compare that to a varnished piece of wood out of the same species of wood, it doesn't look that bad. I don't know if the camera is gonna pick it up, but to the naked eye there is a difference in appearance between the two. It's almost like the pigments in the Cetal loses some of the natural wood colors a little bit. But yeah, if the Cetal is a lot more durable than the varnish, maybe that slight difference in appearance is worth it. I still have another 1 or 2 coats of Cetal to apply to the companionway trim, but once I'm done with that, we'll do another comparison to that little piece of varnished wood so you can see any kind of difference in appearance. But let's get back to the interior trim, because as per the instructions, I am now ready to start applying GoldSpar. First though, of course, there's always going to be a little bit of sanding. I sanded all of the surfaces lightly with 120 grit before wiping everything down to get rid of the dust. Then I could start applying GoldSpar. Over the next 3 days I applied a total of 5 coats, making sure to sand in between coats to get rid of any imperfections and to help flatten any texture left behind by the brush. Every once in a while I'll get a comment saying that I'm dumb for sanding in between coats, but unless you're spraying paint or varnish in a perfectly controlled dustless environment, the only way you're gonna get a nice finish is to sand in between coats. It's a very common thing to do. For the last coat of varnish, I like to use a roller. I found these rollers back in Europe. They have concave ends, which help eliminate pressure on the edges leading to runs. By using a roller, I get a much more even distribution of varnish, and I can easily make sure that I don't get any dry spots that would show up in the final coat. To make 100% sure all the little bubbles are popped before the varnish dries, the last thing I do is just to tip the surface lightly with a brush. Thanks to the magic of video editing, the first 2 coats of wood sealer and the subsequent 5 coats of GoldSpar went on really quick. In reality, it took 5 days. Had I had access to my favorite product, the wood sealer Clear Fast Dry, then I could have gotten the exact same result in only 2 days. The result looks great. I've always had really good luck with the GoldSpar Satin. Now, the Interprime wood sealer, on the other hand, the one-part product here, I don't think this made any kind of real world difference in terms of the speed in which I could build up the film thickness. You could argue that this stuff is a little bit cheaper than the varnish, so maybe you're saving a little bit of money by using this for the first 2 coats. But then again, those 2 coats, if you were using straight varnish, would be heavily thinned, so by doing that, they would be cheaper in and of themselves. So yeah, I don't really know. I don't think this product is for me. I am definitely going to be sticking with its 2-part cousin, the Wood Sealer Clear Fast Dry. In terms of our little seat haul experiment out here in the cockpit, honestly, I'm not loving it. Again, if we take a piece of varnished wood of the same species and hold it up to the cetal treated wood, then you can see that the pigment in the cetal, it very much colors the wood, and you do lose some of those natural wood nuances. So I think that's a little bit of a shame. On the other hand, if you're not actively comparing the cetal treated wood to a varnished piece of wood, it's harder to spot the differences if you don't know what to look for. And then you could argue that if the cetal is a lot more durable than regular varnish, then well, maybe it's worth it. That's gonna come down to a personal preference, I think. For me, I don't think I'm gonna be using cetal in the future. If you use cetal and you really love it, please understand that this is not a slight towards you. There is no right or wrong answer here. It is all down to personal preference, right? Some of us like satin varnish, some of us like glossy varnish. There is no right or wrong answer here. I still have a few more pieces left to install, but those are all for the area here behind the settee, and we're going to be messing around over there in next week's video, so I'll hold off on installing those, but for now we can close the Varnish-palooza task. I'm really glad to be able to close this, mainly because I couldn't get my favorite product, the fast dry wood sealer. I knew this was going to be a little bit of a pain, but now it's done. As if by magic, you might have noticed that a bit of foam insulation and some plywood has shown up. That is because in next week's video, we'll be tackling the last bit of construction here aboard Athena. I'm going to be finishing the aft cabin, but also there's a little bit of messing about I need to do over there behind the settee, as I mentioned, and then I'm hoping we can also get to finish the nav station. Finishing the nav station has been much requested over the years, and I can do most of it next week. I can't put the little trim piece around this bit of stainless here to hide that hole, but we can get this closed up, we can get this all secured in place, we can get it faired and painted so you can't see the end grain of the plywood, we can get this finished down here too, get that hole filled, stuff like that. The thing I'm looking forward to the least about next week's project is having to dig out all of this stuff in the aft cabin so we can get in there, but it's going to be a small price to pay. And on that delightfully positive note, I will end this week's video here. I hope to see all of you guys back here aboard Athena next week for some oh glorious plywood fun. As always, feel free to leave a comment down below, and don't forget, if you've enjoyed this video, please remember to leave a like. See you!